Hello everyone, and welcome to my attempt to beat Pokemon Crystal using only Pokemon that chat gives me using Crowd Control. If you don't know what Crowd Control is, it is an extension that allows viewers on Twitch to interact with compatible games, normally to mess with the streamer. I played on a randomized version of Pokemon Crystal and tried to beat the game only using Pokemon that my chat gifted me, and this is how that run went. The run begins with me waking up in my room before heading downstairs to greet my mother. She then tells me that the professor was looking for me, so I decide to head out and see what he wanted from me. Turns out, he wanted me to race a Pokemon of his, so I gladly accept and I took one of his Pokemon. I then proceed to throw his Spinarak in the trash as my viewer Icy Waters sends me my first two official Pokemon I can use for the run, a Typhlosion and a Gengar. With these two Pokemon in my party, my adventure could finally begin. I then begin to head out to Mr. Pokemon's house when Icy Waters once more sends me a Pokemon, but it happens to be a Magikarp. On Route 32, Waters sends me a random Pokemon, which happens to be a Weedle. Well, not every Pokemon can be a winner, be great, and sometimes things go as I expected, because I honestly expected chat to send me less than stellar Pokemon to make me suffer through the game. But so far, it's honestly been pretty good, so I guess the Weedle's fine. I guess. We make it to Mr. Pokemon's house, where we get the mystery egg before Professor M calls and tells me that something terrible has happened. So I make my way down to Cherry Grove, where I'm challenged to a battle by a red-head boy. He leads with a Primeape, and I lead with Gengar. His Primeape is unable to hit Ghost-type Pokemon, so we proceed to easily defeat him and return to Professor Elm's lab. Yeah, the rival is gonna be a challenge. I mean, I have a Gengar and a Typhlosion. Is anything really gonna be a challenge? Is anything really gonna be a challenge? Icy Waters then names the rival Chanel after my fiancé because he has great taste. Definitely named the random redhead boy after my very much female fiancé. Yep, good going, Waters. You're wonderful at this naming thing. Good job. I'm not sure if she likes that. The rival was named after her, but it wasn't my decision, so I'll be fine, right? I mean, if anyone's gonna get the hate, it's Waters, right? Right. With the opening act out of the way, I then head past Cherry Grove back to Route 30, where I begin to defeat the trainers. One of the trainers on the route happened to have a Ho-Oh, and in Generation 2, Ho-Oh and Lugia's starting movesets are actually terrifying, since they both have their signature moves. However, with some teamwork from both Gengar and Typhlosion, I was able to take on the first really dangerous Pokemon of the run. On the way through the route, Weedle evolves into Kakuna, which still makes him the second most useless Pokemon on my team, with only Magikarp being less useful because it's a Magikarp. I defeat the remaining trainers on Route 30 and 31 and make it to Violet City, the home of the first gym leader and Sprout Tower. Speaking of Sprout Tower, that's my first stop, to not only secure Flash, but also gain more experience for my Pokemon. It is here that I encounter a problem. Because my Pokemon are considered traded, they no longer listen to me once they've reached level 11. Both Typhlosion and Gengar have now grown to this level, when I end up having to face a Tyranitar in Sprout Tower. Since my top two Pokemon don't obey, it comes down to Kakuna to fight. Unfortunately for me, Poison Sting doesn't do very much to the Tyranitar, and it is easily able to turn the tide against Kakuna, and also set up a Sandstorm that does major damage over time. I then switch into Typhlosion, hoping to get some embers off, but Typhlosion decided not to obey for a little while, so fun. Eventually, Typhlosion hits two embers that finishes off the Tyranitar. This is going to be a problem until I beat Bugsy. Oh boy. At the end of the battle, Kakuna evolves into Beedrill. Beedrill is now the most useful Pokemon on my team until it grows another level, that is. We finish off the remaining sages before facing off against the head sage. The head sage leads with a Skiploom, and I lead with Magikarp. The Skiploom uses Tail Whip as I switch into Typhlosion. I try to get Typhlosion to use Ember, but he instead turns away as Skiploom lands another Tail Whip. Typhlosion then instead uses Tackle, and Skiploom goes for another Tail Whip. Typhlosion then chooses to lope around as Skiploom embraces its inner Magikarp and uses Splash. Typhlosion finally listens to me and uses Ember, defeating the Skip Loom. I then switch back into Magikarp as the Sage sends out a Mr. Mime. I then switch into Gengar while the Mr. Mime uses Barrier to increase its defense. I try to get Gengar to use Lick, but it uses Spike instead. I try again, and instead, Gengar uses Hypnosis and puts Mr. Mime to sleep. I try once more, and once again Gengar uses Hypnosis. The same interaction happens over the next 3 turns before Gengar simply refuses to obey. He then goes back to using Hypnosis more instead of listening before the Mr. Mime wakes up and uses Confusion. Gengar once more uses Hypnosis to put his Mr. Mime back to sleep as he continues to not obey me, before finally landing a Lick for slightly more than a quarter of health. Until I get the second gym badge, this is going to be a pain. I can feel it. I switch into Typhlosion and the Mr. Mime wakes up and hits a Confusion. Typhlosion actually obeys and hits an Ember. The Mr. Mime follows up and uses Confusion. Typhlosion then decides to loaf around, taking another Confusion before finishing off the Mr. Mime with an Ember. The Sage then sends out his final Pokemon, a Magmar. I switch back into Magikarp, then switch back into Typhlosion, who is hit by a Smog. I try to have Typhlosion use Ember, but he instead uses Tackle as he's poisoned by a follow-up Smog. Typhlosion then chooses to loaf around as Magmar hits another Smog. I tried to have Typhlosion use Tackle, but he instead uses Ember, which does roughly the same amount of damage as Tackle. Typhlosion is then hit by another Smog that scores a critical hit, leaving him with just 5 HP. Typhlosion then hits Tackle, leaving the Magmar at half health before fainting. I sent in Beedrill, who has now hit level 11, meaning once more, he's the 3rd most useful Pokemon on my team again. And Beedrill eats an Ember before he decides that he likes being cooked alive more than listening to me. He eats another Ember, leaving him at 1 HP before hitting a Poison Sting and fainting to an Ember the following turn. I send out Gengar, who decides to ignore my orders and gets hit in the face with a Fire Punch, knocking him out, ending any chance of victory I have. You'd think with such powerful Pokemon I wouldn't have this much trouble, but unfortunately they don't want to obey, which makes things far more difficult than they have to be. After whiting out, I challenge the Sage to a rematch, and this time, Typhlosion listens a lot more often and easily knocks out the first 2 Pokemon. Typhlosion starts to disobey when we face the Magmar and gets poisoned by Smog. After taking a ton of damage, Typhlosion finally listens and hits a second and a third Tackle, finishing off the Magmar. That was a lot harder than I thought it would be, and I never knew obedience was such a big problem in these games until now. Well, let's see if my disobedient Pokemon will listen to me as I challenge the first gym leader of Johto, Falkner. Falkner leads with a Ledian, and I lead with Magikarp. I switch into Typhlosion as the Ledian goes for Tackle, which does 1 single point of damage. Ledian continues to be one of the Pokemon I'm always disappointed in. Typhlosion then uses Ember, which knocks out the Ledian, and Falkner sends out his final Pokemon, his ace, which happens to be a Snubbull. I switch back into Magikarp and then switch into Beedrill, who takes a Scary Face from the Snubbull. I try to have Beedrill use Poison Sting, but he instead uses Fury Attack, which hits 4 times, dealing roughly half of the Snubbull's health and damage. The Snubbull then uses Tail Whip. Beedrill then doesn't obey on the following turn and is hit by a Tackle for decent damage. Beedrill then uses Poison Sting, which poisons the Snubbull, which then decides to use another Tail Whip. Beedrill then finishes off the Snubbull with a Fury Attack, earning me the first Johto Gym Badge. Elm's assistant then gives me the Mystery Egg, which I proceed to store in the box where it will never, ever see the light of day again. You'd think they'd learn not to trust me with things after the whole Spinneret incident, but apparently that's not a thing. Icy Waters then sends me a gift egg before I head on to Route 32. I now have 4 Pokemon and an egg, one of which is a useless Magikarp and then the other 3 don't obey. I'm sure there won't be any problems with this setup. Oh wait, crowd control is a thing, and while this challenge is set up so that chat helps me by giving me Pokemon to complete the challenge, they can also instead screw me over, and in this case one of my viewers, Fishsticks, decides to teleport me to Blackthorn City. The good news about this is that if I can make it to the bottom of the route, then I will end up between Cherry Grove and New Bark Town, The bad news is that there are level 25 wild Espeons, as well as powerful trainers that you happen to have, oh, I don't know, a level 25 Zapdos. Yeah, that's why number 2. Thankfully, I didn't step foot in the Pokemon Center in Blackthorn, so I'm teleported back to Route 32 from that loss. I finish off the trainers on Route 32, then head into Union Cave. While going through the cave, Merlin sends an effect that evolves Magikarp into Gyarados a couple levels early, so I can't come play. Spectral Mary then drops by and makes me fight a random Pokemon, which happens to be a level 100 Dodrio. What the actual hell, Crowd Control? Thankfully, after a few attempts, Gengar was able to escape. That was a very, very scary situation. Spectral Mary then sends me a random Pokemon that ends up being a Dugong that comes with a Never Melt Ice. The Mary wasn't done yet, as they send me another random Pokemon, which happens to be the legendary Pokemon Mewtwo. I'm liking where this one is going all of a sudden. I make it to Azalea Town, where I'm gifted a Piloswine from Merlin, and I then replace Dugong and Beedrill with Mewtwo and Piloswine. I would like to note here that the Pokemon Crowd Control can gift are limited. However, a random Pokemon will send any and all Pokemon, so my chat at this point is sending completely random Pokemon instead of choosing what to send me. I then head into the Slowpoke well and begin to remind Team Rocket why they disbanded 3 years ago. While doing this, Tommy sends me a random Pokemon that happens to be a Lugia. But it wasn't just any Lugia, it also happened to be shiny. I replace Piloswine and add Lugia to my team. I then finish reminding Team Rocket, then head to the Azalea City Gym where I defeat all the gym trainers and then face the second gym leader of Johto, Bugsy. Bugsy leads with a Jolteon and I lead with Lugia. I switch into Typhlosion and the Jolteon uses Sand Attack. Typhlosion disobeys and the Jolteon hits another Sand Attack. Typhlosion then manages to hit an Ember, which does about 1/3, as the Jolteon hits yet another Sand Attack. Typhlosion disobeys again and uses Smokescreen, and the Jolteon then misses a tackle. Typhlosion disobeys again, and the Jolteon misses another Sand Attack. We miss a few moves until the Jolteon manages to hit a tackle. Typhlosion then decides to use Tackle and knocks the Jolteon below half health before he decides he's done enough and takes a nap. The Jolteon continues to tackle away as Typhlosion wakes up and continues to miss its moves. Typhlosion drops below half health and I switch into Gengar, who is impelted by Sand Attack. Gengar finally hits a lick on Jolteon after not obeying for a while as the Jolteon continues to spam Sand Attack. Gengar then decides to follow Typhlosion and take a nap as well, but eventually, Gengar wakes up, lands a lick to finally get rid of that Sand Attack spamming Jolteon. Bugsy then sends out a Kingdra, and I switch into Lugia. Lugia hits an Aeroblast, which is more than half, and the Kingdra uses Smokescreen. Lugia then manages to hit another Aeroblast, which knocks out the Kingdra, leading to Bugsy's final Pokemon, a Bellsprout. I switch into Typhlosion, who disobeys, and the Bellsprout then uses Growth. Typhlosion proceeds to disobey again, and the Bellsprout puts him to sleep with Sleep Powder. The Bellsprout then uses Wrap, which traps Typhlosion in and does damage over time. However, Typhlosion wakes up and hits an Ember, which defeats the Bellsprout, earning me my second Johto badge, and more importantly, now my Pokemon will obey me. I think this run just entered Easy Mode. Let's test out how easy is Easy Mode and face off against the second rival fight, which is also notorious for being difficult. The rival leads with a Flareon. I lead with Gengar. The rival switches into Primeape, and I use Hypnosis, which puts the Primeape to sleep. I then begin to spam Lick, which doesn't do a lot of damage, but the Primeape sleeps until its final turn, where it wakes up and uses Sleer before a final Lick knocks it out. The rival then sends back out Flareon, and I switch into Gyarados. I have Gyarados use Tackle, and the Flareon uses Sand Attack. The same turn happens again as the Flareon uses another sand attack. Gyarados misses its third tackle and the Flareon hits a tackle before finally Gyarados hits its fourth tackle and defeats it. The rival sends in his final Pokemon, which happens to be a Pikachu, and I switch into the legendary Mewtwo. The Pikachu paralyzes Mewtwo on the switch, then uses Tail Whip as Mewtwo lands a confusion which defeats the Pikachu, winning me the battle. After defeating the rival, I decide to head to the Pokemon Center, but Merlin decides that things are going way too well and teleports me to the Whirl Islands. Feralbite then sends a random Pokemon, which happens to be a Blastoise, after me. I'm able to defeat it, but now I'm stranded. Yay! I guess this is how the run ends. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this run. It might have been short, but yeah, we're trapped! That is, until Feralbite decides to teleport me to the Viridian Forest, which, while it does prevent me from being stranded, I am now in Kanto, with the numerous powerful trainers. Speaking of which, I face a trainer who happens to have a level 34 Golem that proceeds to explode on Gyarados as I try to white out, so I win the battle somehow. I then face another trainer who happens to have a level 32 Magneton, and I hope that he can wipe my team. I was able to defeat the Magneton with Typhlosion, however, he sends out a Hitmonchan which is able to defeat my final two Pokemon, sending me back to Azalea Town. I then head into the Ilex Forest, where Chat forces me to fight a random Pokemon, which happens to be a level 100 Kabutops. Again, crowd control. Why? It defeats Mewtwo and Gengar before I'm able to run away. I then return the Farfetch'd to the owners, but before I can talk to them and get cut, Valixion teleports me all the way back to New Bark Town. Well, time to walk all the way back. After trekking all the way from New Bark Town to the Ilex Forest, we easily make our way through the forest to Route 34 and then to Goldenrod City. We clear out the trainers around Goldenrod and the gym trainers before finally taking on the third gym leader of the run, Whitney. Whitney leads with a Muk and I lead Gyarados. I have Gyarados use Bite, which doesn't do that much damage as the Muk uses Harden. Gyarados then uses a second Bite, which flinches the Muk before following up with a third Bite, which puts the Muk at half health and flinches it once more. Gyarados then hits a fourth Bite as the Muk retaliates with a Pounce for decent damage. This back and forth continues until Gyarados is finally able to take down the Muk on his sixth Bite attack. Whitney then sends in her ace Pokemon, a Wobbuffet, and I stay in with Gyarados. I have Gyarados use Bite for super effective damage, dealing about a quarter of the Wobbuffet's health, and it retaliates with Safeguard. I then use another Bite, which puts the Wobbuffet on half health, and it retaliates with a Miracle, which easily knocks out Gyarados. I then send out Lugia and have it use Aeroblast, which knocks out the Wobbuffet, giving me a fairly easy victory over the third gym leader of Johto. I then head north of Goldenrod and make my way past Route 35, the National Park, Route 36, and Route 37 before making it to Ecruteak City, the home of the 4th Gym Badge and the 4th Gym Leader, Morty. But before I take on Morty, I take out the Kimono Girls and obtain Surf. I then head into the Burn Tower, where I face off against the rival once more. The rival leads with a Phanpy, and I lead with Gyarados. I have Gyarados use Surf, which easily knocks out the Phanpy, and that leads the rival to send out his second Pokemon, a Tentacool. I send in Mewtwo, who knocks out the Tentacool with a Confusion, leading to the rival sending out his next Pokemon, a Sandslash. I stay in with Mewtwo, who uses Confusion and almost knocks out the Sandslash. The Sandslash then decides to use Defense Curl, which leads to a follow-up Confusion, finishing it off. The rival then sends out his final Pokemon and his starter, Primeape, and I switch into Lugia, who defeats the fighting type with a single Aeroblast. I then free the legendary Beast, then head to the Ecruteak Gym and begin defeating the gym trainers, when Spectral Mary decides to teleport me to Bill's cottage all the way in Kanto. Thankfully, I had obtained the TM for the move Teleport, which I teach to Mewtwo and teleport all the way back to Equity. I then finished the gym trainers before facing off against the 4th gym leader, Morty. Morty leads with a Growlithe and I lead with Mewtwo. Mewtwo uses Confusion, which is able to knock out the Growlithe, and leads to Morty sending out his second Pokemon, a Shuckle. I then switch into Lugia, who scores a critical hit Aeroblast, which the Shuckle survives on a sliver of health before it decides to use its only turn to use the wonderful move, Withdraw. Yeah, good job, Shuckle. Lugia then finishes off the Shuckle with a Gust, leading to Morty sending out his third Pokemon, his ace, Azumarill. I stay with Lugia and use Aeroblast, which scores yet another critical hit, knocking out the Azumarill. Morty then sends out his final Pokemon, which happens to be a Flaffy, and I accidentally stay in with Lugia. I then switch to Typhlosion, who gets hit with a Thunder Shock. Typhlosion is then able to use Ember, which has more than 1/3 of Flaffy's health, as the Flaffy retaliates with a growl, lowering my physical attack when Typhlosion is clearly a special attacker at this point. Typhlosion then uses another Ember, which puts the Flaffy in low health as he uses Thunder Wave to paralyze Typhlosion. The Flaffy then follows up with a Thunder Shock, and Typhlosion remains fully paralyzed, thus is unable to attack. Typhlosion is then hit with another Thunder Shock, which puts him on half health before he finally said he's had enough and knocks out the Flaffy with one final Ember, earning me my 4th gym badge in the Johto region. I then make my way through Route 38, Route 39, and finally make it to Olivine City, where I climb the lighthouse to find the gym leader doesn't want to face me because she heard I was walking around with a Mewtwo and a shiny Lugia. So instead, she makes up some excuse about a sick Pokemon so that I have to go to get some medicine across the sea. Since Cianwood is the goal, we decide to surf along Route 40, where Icy Waters keeps pressing the Give Random Pokemon button, which eventually gives me a Zapdos. However, I don't add it to my team as I want to hatch this egg first before adding another Pokemon. Yes, the same egg from the start of the game has still not hatched even after I've gotten 4 badges and traveled across almost half of the region. Valixion also joins in on sending random Pokemon to me as I successfully make my way to Cianwood City, where the 5th gym leader Chuck is. Let's see if Chuck can handle the team that my chap has sent me. Chuck leads off with a Remoraid and I lead with Gengar. Gengar uses Nightshade, which does slightly less than half, and the Remoraid uses Psybeam, which knocks Gengar below half health. I then have Gengar use Hypnosis, which hits and puts the Remoraid to sleep. I then have Gengar use Nightshade, which knocks out the Remoraid, so apparently it was exactly half and not above half. Chuck's final Pokemon is a Venonat and I switch into Gyarados. I have Gyarados use Surf, which does half of the Venonat's health and damage. I then have Gyarados use Strength, which knocks out the Venonat, earning me the 5th gym badge. Chuck's wife is also happy that I beat her husband since he was getting chubby, so she gives me the HM for Fla. I then face off against Eusine, the soothing obsessed man, and he leads off with a Hoppip and I lead with Gyarados. I have Gyarados use Strength, which is able to knock out the Hoppip, leading to Eusine sending his second Pokemon out, a Weepinbell. I have Gyarados use Strength again, which also manages to knock out the Weepinbell, leading to his final Pokemon and Execute. Eusine must really love his grass types. I have Gyarados use Strength, which has more than half of the Execute's health and damage, and the egg Pokemon misses its Stun Spore, leading to a second Strength from Gyarados, knocking it out, winning me a very easy battle. I then fly back to Olivine and climb up the lighthouse where Icy Waters once more gives me a random Pokemon, and this one happens to be a Dragonite, my favorite pseudo-legend Pokemon. I, however, still want to focus on the egg, so I don't add it to my team. Now that Amphi is all better, I head to Olivine City Gym where I take on the 6th gym leader, Jasmine. Jasmine leads with a Scyther and I lead Gyarados. The Scyther opens up with a Wing Attack that does 1/4 to the Gyarados, who retaliates with Strength, which is slightly half than the Scyther's health and damage. The Scyther follows up with a Wing Attack, which puts Gyarados into yellow health, and Gyarados uses Strength, which the Scyther survives on a sliver of health. The Scyther then hits a critical wing attack, which manages to knock out my Gyarados. I send in Typhlosion, who is able to pick up the Revenge Shield with a quick attack. Jasmine sends in her second Pokemon, Amaro, and I switch into Lugia. Lugia hits an Aeroblast, which easily knocks out Maro, into her final Pokemon, a Jumpluff. Lugia, once more, uses Aeroblast, which defeats the Jumpluff, earning me my 6th gym badge in Johto. With 6 gym badges, we then fly to Ecruteak and head to Route 42 and make my way to Mahogany Town, which is home of the 7th gym leader. However, before we can defeat Price, we need to first head to the Lake of Rage. On the way to the Lake of Rage, Dragonflame sends me a Vaporeon, which, unfortunately leads to the Degens in chat spamming that meme. Y'all know who y'all are. We'll ignore them being, well, themselves, and continue to beat down the trainers on the way to the Lake of Rage before I finally face off against a shiny Gyarados, which just happens to be an Articuno. Unfortunately, I can only use Pokemon chat sends me, so we have Gyarados to the deed of ending the life of this shiny Articuno. Lance then enlists my help to take down Team Rocket, and then proceeds to have his Dragonite murder a man in front of a 10-year-old child. What kind of sick freak are you, Lance? Well, since I'm now an accomplice to murder, I might as well make sure there are no more witnesses, right? Lance's crimes are kind of heinous at this point, so I take out Team Rocket with the keys and then hatch the egg from all the time ago, and it ends up being a Dratini. This is quite useless as I already have a Dragonite, but at least I can have a full team of 6 now. Wait, no, Water sends me another egg. Well, here we go again. I decide to switch out Gyarados for Vaporeon, since I wanted something that wasn't a physical attacker, and, surprisingly enough, I'm also not the biggest fan of Gyarados in Gen 2. I then head into the Mahogany City Gym and easily take out all of the trainers before facing off against the 7th gym leader of Johto, Price. Price leads with an Onix, and I lead with Gengar. I have Gengar use Nightshade, which does about half, as the Onix then goes for Harden. Gengar then uses another Nightshade, which knocks out the Onix and leads to Price's next Pokemon, which happens to be a Poliwrath. I switch into Lugia and use an Aeroblast, which absolutely obliterates the fighting Water-type Pokemon. Price then sends out his final Pokemon, which happens to be an Electrode, and I switch into Mewtwo. I use Confusion, which does half health, to Electrode, and it retaliates with a Screech. Mewtwo then uses one more Confusion, which finishes off the Electrode, ending the battle and earning me an extremely easy 7th gym badge. We then receive a call from Professor Elm, who tells us of how Team Rocket has taken over the radio tower, so we decide to go towards the radio tower to make sure no one knows us from our unfortunate Lance accomplice incident. Remember, we can't leave any witnesses. We clear out the first half of the radio tower and notice that the other half is locked. Thankfully, the rocket at the top was nice enough to tell me where the director who had the key was, and he also didn't recognize me from any previous situations, so I promptly left the premises and went into the underground where I faced off against the rival once more. The rival leads with a Fortress, and I lead with Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Confusion, which does 1/3 of the Fortress's health, as the Fortress goes for Bide. I then use another Confusion, which scores a critical hit, knocking out the Fortress. The rival then sends out a Kadabra, and I switch into Vaporeon. Vaporeon is hit with a Psybeam, which confuses it, which causes it to hurt itself. The Kadabra then hits another Psybeam, putting Vaporeon on low health as Vaporeon retaliates with a Bite, which knocks out the Kadabra. The rival then sends in an Elekid, and I send in Typhlosion. Typhlosion hits a Flame Wheel, which puts the Elekid in low health as the Elekid goes for Leer. Typhlosion then finishes off the Elekid with another Flame Wheel as the rival sends out a Nidorino. I keep Typhlosion in and land a Flame Wheel, which puts the Nidorino into low yellow health, and it retaliates with a double kick. I then have Typhlosion use another Flame Wheel, which knocks out the Nidorino, leading to the rival sending out his starter Pokemon, Primeape. I stay in with Typhlosion and use Flame Wheel, which does about half the damage to the Primeape as it retaliates with a Karate Chop. I then have Typhlosion hit another Flame Wheel, which knocks out the Primate, winning me a fairly easy battle against the rival. We clear out the rest of Team Rocket from the underground, find the Director, who gives me the key to the other side of the radio tower, and that means it's officially time to finish clearing out all of the witnesses and finish what Lance started. I head up to the radio tower and clear out the other half before facing the Executive trying to revive Team Rocket. The Team Rocket Executive leads off with a Drowsy and I lead with Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Swift, which does more than half damage as the Drowsy retaliates with a Headbutt. I then have Mewtwo once more attack with Swift, which finishes off the Drowsy. The Executive then sends out a Quagsire, and I send out Vaporeon. I have Vaporeon use Surf, which puts the Quagsire in the red, as it uses Amnesia. Vaporeon then uses another Surf, which finishes off the Quagsire, leading to the Executive's final Pokemon, Amari. I decide to make him suffer a little bit, and I stay in with Vaporeon and use Surf, which knocks out the Mareep in a single hit, ending the final Team Rocket member, and after having a nice chat with him, he and his colleagues leave, and I never have to worry about being an accomplice to murder again. Hooray! With that fiasco behind me, I pass Route 44 and arrive at the Ice Path where Spectral Mary sends me a Tyranitar. I decide that I'm done hatching the eggs that Waters was sending me, and that this Tyranitar would round out my team as my 6th and final member. Waters protested quite a lot, by the way. Waters was like, "No, Mr. 10, you better hatch this. Mr. Uran, I swear, you better hatch this egg." No, I'm not hatching the egg. I refuse. Thank you very much. I then make it to Blackthorn City, where I take out all of the gym trainers before facing off against the 8th and final gym leader, Claire. Claire leads with a Swinub, and I lead with Typhlosion. I have Typhlosion use Flame Wheel, which knocks out the Swinub in a single hit, which leads to Claire sending out Haunter. I have Typhlosion once more use Flame Wheel, which scores a critical hit and knocks out the Haunter. Claire then sends out her third Pokemon, a Girafarig, and I once more go for Flame Wheel with just slightly less than half of the Girafarig's health and damage, as the Girafarig goes for an agility. Now that it is faster than Typhlosion, the Girafarig uses Stomp on Typhlosion, who retaliates with a Flame Wheel, which knocks out the Girafarig. Claire then sends out her final Pokemon, a Charizard, and I switch into Tyranitar. The Charizard uses Scary Face as Tyranitar hits a single Rock Slide, which immediately destroys the Fire Lizard Pokemon, earning me the 8th and final gym badge after a quick trip to the Dragon's Den. With Claire defeated, we head past Route 27, our first step into Kanto and the road to the Pokemon League, Route 26, and make it through Victory Road only to be stopped near the exit by the rival. The rival leads with a Fortress, and I lead with Tyranitar. Tyranitar uses Rock Slide, which does slightly less than half of the Fortress's health and damage as the Fortress goes for Bide. I then switch to using Screech as the Fortress continues to use Bide. Once Bide fails to unleash energy, I switch back into using Rock Slide, which easily knocks out the Fortress now that its defense has been lowered. The rival then sends in an Ivysaur, and I switch into Lugia. With a single Aeroblast, Ivysaur is knocked out, which leads to the rival sending out their third Pokemon, a Rattata. I stay with Lugia, uses Fly, which misses the Rattata, who is then able to retaliate with a Super Fang, which always reduces the Pokemon's current HP by 50%. I then have Lugia use another Fly, which connects this time and knocks out the Rattata. The rival then sends in an Elekid, and I switch into Gengar. I have Gengar use Waterfall, which does about half of the Elekid's health and damage as Elekid retaliates with Screech. I have Gengar use another Waterfall, which knocks out the Elekid. Just in case I didn't say it earlier, I have the randomizer set so that every Pokemon can learn every HM so that it isn't impossible for me to be stuck. That is why Gengar knows Waterfall. The rival then sends out an Arbok and I stay in on Gengar. I have Gengar use Hypnosis, which actually manages to hit before finishing off the Arbok with a single Dream Eater. The rival sends out his final Pokemon, his starter, Primeape, and I stay with Gengar, who is easily able to defeat the Primeape, as just as the journey began, it is still unable to hit Ghost-type Pokemon. With all the trainers blocking my path to the Pokemon League disposed of, I heal up my Pokemon, buy the supplies that will help us during the league, and we then take on the Pokemon League, starting with its first member, Will. Will leads with Paras and I lead with Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Confusion, which the Paras barely survives as it hits a Spore, putting Mewtwo to sleep. The Paras then hits a critical slash as Mewtwo continues to sleep. This exchange continues for 5 more turns as Mewtwo sleeps and Paras continues to use Slash and Leech Life. Mewtwo then wakes up and knocks out the Paras with a Confusion, leading to Will's second Pokemon, Jigglypuff. Mewtwo uses Confusion, which does a lot of damage to the Jigglypuff. However, Mewtwo is then hit by a Double Edge, barely surviving on just 2 HP. I then have Mewtwo finish off the Jigglypuff with another Confusion, leading to Will's third Pokemon, a Dragonair. I switch into Vaporeon and the Dragonair goes for Agility, while Vaporeon hits an Aurora Beam, which does about half of the Dragonair's health in damage. The Dragonair then hits a Dragon Rage as Vaporeon finishes it off with a second Aurora Beam. Will then sends out a Tentacruel and I switch into Gengar. I have Gengar use Hypnosis, but it misses as Tentacruel hits a Bubble Beam. I then have Gengar go for another Hypnosis, which once again misses as Gengar is hit by another Bubble Beam. I go for it a third time, which it once again misses and Gengar is then hit by another Bubble Beam, this time dropping its speed, allowing Tentacruel to finish it off with one more Bubble Beam. Good job, Gengar, that totally was not disappointing in any way, shape, or form. I then switch into Lugia and use Fly, which is more than half of the Tentacruel's HP in damage, but it goes for Barrier, after which doubles its defense. My second Fly leaves the Tentacruel at about a quarter as it lands a Bubble Beam. The Tentacruel then lands another Bubble Beam as I have Lugia fire off an Aeroblast which knocks out the Tentacruel, leading to Will's final Pokemon, a Mantine. I switch into Tyranitar, who is hit by a Bubble Beam for super effective damage, as I go for a Rock Slide, which connects and knocks out the Mantine, earning me the win over the first member of the Elite Four. I'll admit that wasn't a very clean battle, but you know, a win is a win is a win is a win. Next up is a second member of the Elite Four, Koga. Koga leads with my favorite Pokemon, a Wartortle, and I lead with Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Confusion, which knocks the Wartortle to about half health before it retaliates with a super effective bite. I then have Mewtwo finish off the Wartortle with a Confusion, leading to Koga sending out his second Pokemon, a Vaporeon. I stay in on Mewtwo and use Confusion, which does about a quarter of the Vaporeon's health and damage, and also manages to confuse it. However, the Vaporeon fights through Confusion and lands a bite which puts Mewtwo below half health. Mewtwo lands another Confusion which puts the Vaporeon at half health, as the Vaporeon then manages to hit itself in Confusion. Mewtwo then hits another Confusion which puts Vaporeon in red health. However, the Vaporeon fights through Confusion and hits a bite which also puts Mewtwo in red health. Mewtwo, however, is faster and is able to land one final Confusion to knock out the Vaporeon. Koga then sends out a Ferret and I switch into my own Vaporeon. The Ferret misses its attack and Vaporeon hits a Surf which knocks the Ferret below half health. The Ferret then lands a Slam for good damage before being knocked out by a second Surf. Koga then sends in his fourth Pokemon, a Magneton, and I switch into Typhlosion. Typhlosion uses Flame Wheel, which leaves the Magneton on low health as it misses its next attack. Koga then uses a full restore, but my next Flame Wheel is a better roll and knocks out the Magneton, leaving Koga with one final Pokemon, a Clefable. I switch into Vaporeon and use Surf, which does about a quarter damage and the Clefable misses its attack. Vaporeon hits another Surf as Clefable now manages to land a Double Stab, but it's too little, too late, as Vaporeon lands one final surf to knock out Koga's final Pokemon, earning me the win. Let's see how the third member of the Elite Four, Bruno, fares. Bruno leads with a Mantine, and I lead with Typhlosion. I switch into Lugia, and the Mantine uses Agility, which doubles its speed. The Mantine then hits a Bubble Beam as Lugia goes for Fly, which does exactly half health. The Mantine hits another Bubble Beam as Lugia goes for another Fly, which hits and knocks out the Mantine, leading to Bruno's second Pokemon, Kangaskhan. I stay in on Lugia and use Fly, which does about a quarter damage as the Kangaskhan uses Tail Whip. I use another Fly, which puts the Kangaskhan in orange health, as uses Rage to put Lugia slightly above half health. I have Lugia use Aeroblast, which finishes off the Kangaskhan, leading to Bruno's next Pokemon, a Mr. Mime. I switch to Vaporeon, and the Mime uses Psybeam, which doesn't do too much damage as I use Bite, which knocks it to slightly above half. The Mr. Mime uses Reflect, and I switch to using Surf, which knocks out Mr. Mime. Bruno then sends out a Blossom, and I send out Typhlosion. Typhlosion uses Flame Wheel, which leaves the Blossom on half health as it paralyzes Typhlosion with a Stun Spore. The Blossom then lands a Petal Dance as Typhlosion is able to finish it off with another Flame Wheel. Bruno then sends out his last Pokemon, a Chansey, and I send out Tyranitar. I have Tyranitar use Strength, and the Chansey uses Minimize to increase its evasion. I then have Tyranitar use Screech, which lowers the Chansey's defense by 2 stages, but Chansey clearly didn't like that and uses Defense Curl, so it's only at a -1. I use another Screech and it uses another Defense Curl. I then hit the Chansey with a Strength, which knocks it out, winning me the battle versus Bruno. It is now time to face the final Elite Four member, Karen. Karen leads with a Machamp, and I lead with Gengar. I have Gengar use Waterfall, which scores a critical hit and does about half damage as the Machamp uses Foresight, which means it can now hit Ghost types. So much for that immunity. I then go for Hypnosis and put the Machamp to sleep before I finish it off with a Dream Eater. Karen then sends out a Mantine, and I switch into Lugia. I have Lugia use Fly as the Mantine goes for Agility. Lugia's Fly scores a critical hit, which leaves the Mantine at low health, leading to a follow-up Fly, finishing it off. Karen then sends out a Suicune, and I stay with Lugia. I have Lugia use Aeroblast, which lands a critical hit and does about half of the Suicune's health, as the Suicune then decides to use Rain Dance. I then use Fly, which puts the Suicune into orange health. Lugia then trades Fly with Suicune's Bubble Beams and Rain Dance before switching into using Recover and going for Stall strategy until I could recover enough. Once Lugia had recovered, I go for another Fly as the Suicune sets up another Rain Dance. Finally, I go for the final Fly attack, which defeats the Suicune. Karen then sends out a Growlithe and I switch into Vaporeon. Suicune also left up the rain before going down, so the Growlithe is hit by a powered up Surf, easily knocking it out. Karen's final Pokemon ends up being a Kakuna, so I switch into Gengar. He uses Waterfall to defeat the Bug type. With all of the Elite Four out of the way, it's time to take on the Pokemon League champion and the murder of that one random Team Rocket grunt, Lance. Lance leads with a Quagsire and I lead with Gengar. I switch into Lugia as the Quagsire goes for an Earthquake. Lugia misses its first Fly as the Quagsire hits Slap. Lugia then hits a Fly, which does about 1/3 of the damage to the Quagsire. Lugia then hits a second Fly, which knocks the Quagsire to below half health as the Quagsire then manages to hit another Slam. I then have Lugia finish it off with an Aeroblast, which leads to Lance sending out Donphan. I switch into Vaporeon and have Vaporeon use Surf, which is able to knock out the Donphan. Lance then sends out a Machoke, and I switch into Gengar. My first Hypnosis misses as the Machoke uses Foresight, meaning just like its older brother, it can now hit Ghost-type Pokemon. However, Gengar's second Hypnosis hits, putting the Machoke to sleep, and then Gengar is able to use Dream Eater, which leaves the Machoke on no health. Lance doesn't use a full restore, and a final Dream Eater is able to finish off the Machoke. Lance then sends out a Dratini, and I switch into Vaporeon. I have Vaporeon use Aurora Beam, which leaves the Dratini on low health as it retaliates with a Dragon Rage, a move that only does 40 damage. A final Aurora Beam finishes off the Dragon type, and Lance sends out Coughing. I switch into a Mewtwo who uses Confusion to knock out the Coughing, which leads to the final Pokemon, Hitmonlee. I stay in with Mewtwo and use Confusion, which knocks the Hitmonlee down to half health, and it retaliates with a Mega Kick, which takes Mewtwo down to slightly more than half health. Mewtwo then launches a follow-up Confusion, which does just enough damage to knock out the Hitmonlee, winning us the battle and defeating the Pokemon League. But just because the league is done doesn't mean our journey is. We still have the entirety of Kanto to go, and with how underleveled I am, maybe the gym leaders there would provide a challenge. We'll tackle Kanto Gauntlet style, and our first gym leader will be none other than Brock. Brock leads with a Nidorina, and I lead with Lugia. I have Lugia use Aeroblast, which leaves the Nidorina in red health as it retaliates with a bite attack for slight damage. Lugia then uses Fly, which knocks out the Nidorina, and Brock then sends out an Articuno. I switch into Typhlosion and use Flame Wheel, which does slightly less than half of the Articuno's health and damage, and the Articuno retaliates with Powder Snow, which doesn't do much damage to Typhlosion. Typhlosion then uses a second Flame Wheel, which the Articuno barely survives in red health before the Articuno goes for Agility, doubling its speed. Brock then heals Articuno with a Hyper Potion, as I have Typhlosion use another Flame Wheel, which once more does less than half of the Articuno's health. The Articuno then uses Powder Snow for a little damage, so I have Typhlosion hit another Flame Wheel, which this time scores a critical hit and knocks out the Articuno. Brock then sends in a Charmeleon, and I switch in Vaporeon with the words, and I quote, "I'll drown it." The Charmeleon uses Scary Face, and Vaporeon hits a Surf, which knocks out the Charmeleon. Brock then sends out a Delibird, and I stay in with Vaporeon. The Delibird uses a weak Present before it's easily knocked out by Surf, leading to Brock's final Pokemon, a Psyduck. I switch into Lugia and have it use Aeroblast, which easily knocks out the Psyduck, earning me the Boulder Badge. Very easy gym badge for an easy gym battle. Kanto, what are you doing? With Brock out of the way, let's face our second Kanto gym leader, Misty. Misty leads with a Totodile, and I lead with Vaporeon. I have Vaporeon use Bite, which does about half of the Totodile's health, as it retaliates with a critical slash attack. Vaporeon then finishes off the Totodile with another Bite, leading to Misty's second Pokemon, which happens to be a Sunflora. I switch into Typhlosion and have Typhlosion use Flame Wheel, which does more than half of the Sunflora's health as it starts charging up a Solar Beam. Sadly for Sunflora, Typhlosion is faster and is able to knock it out with a follow-up Flame Wheel, leading to her third Pokemon, a Marowak. I switch into Vaporeon and use Surf, which easily knocks out the Marowak, and Misty then sends in her final Pokemon, which happens to be a Granbull. I switch into Typhlosion and have him use Flame Wheel, which does slightly less than half damage to the Granbull, but it also gets burned. Granbull then uses a weak Bite before Typhlosion hits another Flame Wheel, which knocks out the Granbull thanks to burn damage. Second Kanto badge down, let's now go take care of Surge. Surge leads with a Shuckle, and I lead with Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Confusion, which does about a quarter of the Shuckle's health, and then the Shuckle goes for Bide. I proceed to stall out the Shuckle's Bide turns by repeatedly going for Teleport until Bide fails. I then have Mewtwo use another Confusion, which scores a critical hit and puts the Shuckle in red health. Mewtwo then hits one final Confusion, which knocks out the Shuckle, which leads to Surge sending out a Ninetales. I leave Mewtwo in and use Confusion, which does about a third of the Ninetales' health and damage, as the Ninetales retaliates with Confusory. I then switch into Vaporeon, who gets hit with a quick attack on the switch. The Ninetales then uses a weak Fire Spin, as Vaporeon is able to knock it out with a Surf. Surge then sends out a Slowpoke, and I switch back into Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Swift, which does about a third damage, and the Slowpoke hits a weak Headbutt. Mewtwo then hits a critical hit Swift, which the Slowpoke survives on a sliver of health before hitting another weak Headbutt. Mewtwo finishes off Slowpoke with another Swift as Surge then sends out a Rhyhorn. I leave Mewtwo in and use Confusion, which is easily able to knock out Rhyhorn due to its low special defense. Surge then sends out his final Pokemon, the evolved form Rhydon. I switch into Lugia, who has now learned Hydro Pump, which I use to knock out the Rhydon, earning me the Thunder Badge. Third Kanto Badge down, now let's go have a nice fun date with Erica. Erica leads with a Gyarados, and I lead with Typhlosion. I switch into Tyranitar, who gets hit by a Leer on the switch. The Gyarados then uses another Leer, as I have Tyranitar use Rock Slide, which knocks out the Gyarados in a single hit. Erica then sends out a Hoppip, and I switch it to Typhlosion, who I have used Flame Wheel, which is able to easily knock out the Hoppip. Erica then sends in Magcargo, and I switch it to Vaporeon. Vaporeon easily defeats the Magcargo with a quad-effective Surf. Erica then sends out her final Pokemon, which happens to be an Ekans. I switch into Typhlosion, who hits a Flame Wheel, which has more than half of the Ekans' health, as it retaliates with Glare, paralyzing Typhlosion. Erica then uses a Hyper Potion, as I hit another Flame Wheel. The Ekans then hits an Acid, as Typhlosion hits a final Flame Wheel, winning me a very easy 4th Kanto Gym Badge. Well, up there with Erica was kinda lacking. Let's see if Koga's daughter Janine would be a better date. Janine leads with an Omanite, and I lead with Gengar. I have Gengar use Waterfall, which knocks out the Omanite, leading to Janine sending out an Ursaring. I have Gengar use another Waterfall, which also manages to knock out the Ursaring. That's 2 in a row. Janine then sends out a Misdreavus, and I switch into Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Confusion, which the Mischievous manages to survive before retaliating with a Psybeam, a move I wish Mewtwo knew because Confusion, this late in the game, man, Mewtwo's moveset, man, so good, so good. Mewtwo then uses a second Confusion to knock out the Mischievous. Janine then sends out a Natu, and I stay in with Mewtwo. A single Swift is all it takes to knock out the Natu, leading to her final Pokemon, a Weedle. Well, that was a very uneventful, easy battle, and that date was nowhere near as good as Erica's, and Erica's date wasn't even that good. One more candidate left. Let's go find out how Sabrina will fare. Will she actually be a fun date, or will this date be just like the rest? Sabrina leads with a Kabutops, and I lead with Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Confusion, which does about half of the Kabutops' health, and the Kabutops then uses Sand Attack, which causes my next Confusion to miss. Kabutops then hits a Slash for a little damage, then my next Confusion hits and knocks out the Kabutops. Sabrina then sends in an Omastar, and I switch into Lugia. I have Lugia use Hydro Pump, but it misses as the Omanite then uses Leer. I then have Lugia use another Hydro Pump, which hits this time, leaving the Omanite at half health. The Omanite then uses Spike Cannon, which doesn't do much damage, and the second Hydro Pump is easily able to take out the Omanite. Sabrina then sends out her final Pokemon, a Magmar, which actually manages to survive a Hydro Pump from Lugia and set up the sun. Sabrina then uses a Hyper Potion to fully heal Magmar, as I tell Lugia to now use Aeroblast. The Aeroblast leaves the Magmar with less than half of its health, and a follow-up Aeroblast is able to defeat it, earning me my 6th Kanto Gym Badge. Let's see if Blaine can actually light a fire under Kanto. Blaine leads with a Fortress, and I lead with Lugia. Cosmo activates Feint through Cloud Control and feints Lugia, forcing me to send out Typhlosion. Unfortunately, I'm stuck with Ember, as I accidentally deleted Flame Wheel on the way to the Seafoam Islands. Blaine then sends out a Qwilfish, and I send in Mewtwo. A single Confusion is all it takes to knock out the Water Poison type. Blaine then sends out his final Pokemon, Flareon, and I send out Vaporeon. Vaporeon easily knocks out the Flareon in a single surf, earning my 7th Kanto Gym Badge from another easy battle. Can Blue redeem his other colleagues and actually be a challenge? Blue leads with a Magcargo, and I lead with Lugia. I have Lugia use Hydro Pump, which misses, and the Magcargo uses Amnesia. The second Hydro Pump hits, and Magcargo barely survives in red health. Lugia is then hit with a Rock Slide, with just slightly less than half of its health and damage. A follow-up Hydro Pump knocks out the Magcargo, and Blue sends in Murkrow. I switch into Tyranitar, who is hit by a Nightshade. However, Tyranitar is able to hit a super effective Rock Slide on the Murkrow, which easily knocks it out. Blue then sends in a Kingler, and I switch into Gengar. I go for Hypnosis, which hits, and I then have Gengar follow up with a Dream Eater, which has more than half of the Kingler's health and damage. I then have Gengar follow up with another Dream Eater, which finishes off the Kingler. Blue then sends out a Beedrill, and I switch into Mewtwo. I have Mewtwo use Confusion, which is slightly more than half damage to the Beedrill as it retaliates with Rage. I then have Mewtwo follow up with a Confusion, which knocks out the Beedrill, leading to Blue sending out a Togetic. I switch back into Tyranitar, who is able to hit a Rock Slide on the Togetic, which leaves it on a sliver of health, and also flinches it. Tyranitar then uses Strength, which knocks out the Togetic, leading to Blue's final Pokemon, a Nidoking. I accidentally send out Typhlosion, and then switch into Vaporeon, who tanks a Double Kick from the Nidoking. The Nidoking then hits a powerful Thrash, which leaves Vaporeon below half health, and Vaporeon then hits a Surf, which leaves the Nidoking on a sliver. Nidoking then hits another Thrash, which Vaporeon barely survives, with only 12 HP remaining. Vaporeon is then able to land one final Surf, defeating Nidoking and winning me the battle against the final gym leader of the run. But you know what's next, the toughest trainer in the game. My Pokemon being almost 40 levels below his, with this much of a disadvantage, can I manage to defeat Red? Well, let's find out. Red leads with a Hitmonchan and I lead with Typhlosion. I switch into Gengar as the Hitmonchan uses Detect. Gengar uses Hypnosis, but the Hitmonchan uses Detect again and continues to spam Detect for a while as Gengar manages to miss Hypnosis. Eventually, Gengar hits a Hypnosis, which puts the Hitmonchan asleep, but Red then uses a full Restore to heal the Hitmonchan before Gengar can hit Dream Eater. Red then repeats this exchange after another Hypnosis hits. Eventually, the Hitmonchan stays asleep and Gengar hits a Dream Eater, which does about 1/3 to the Hitmonchan. Gengar hits another Dream Eater, which leaves the Hitmonchan with 1/3 of its health before finally finishing it off with a final Dream Eater. Red then sends out a Doduo and I switch into Tyranitar. The Doduo uses Agility as Tyranitar misses its first Rock Slide. The Doduo then hits a Drill Peck for decent damage as Tyranitar goes for another Rock Slide, which hits and is able to knock out the Flying type Pokemon. Red then sends in a Poliwhirl and I switch into Vaporeon. The Poliwhirl uses Belly Drum, maxing out its attack as Vaporeon hits a weak bite. The Poliwhirl then hits a Body Slam, which easily knocks out my Vaporeon and now puts me in a really bad position. This is not good. I switch it to Gengar and the Poliwhirl switches to Hydro Pump, which leaves Gengar on just 3 HP. But Gengar comes in clutch and hits an Hypnosis. But Gengar wasn't done being clutch, as Dream Eater hits and scores a critical hit on the Poliwhirl, knocking it out. 3 more Pokemon to go for Red. Let's see if we can finish the job. Red then sends out a Crobat and I switch it to Mewtwo. I realized that this wasn't the best play, and I switched to Tyranitar instead, who is hit by a Wing Attack, which scores a critical hit and does massive damage. The Crobat then hits another Wing Attack, which Tyranitar survives with just 11 hit points, as Crobat is then hit with a Rock Slide, which is slightly less than half of the Crobat's health. That's not good. A follow-up Wing Attack knocks out Tyranitar, so I switch into Lugia. Lugia, at this point, has the highest defense on my team, access to recover, and also the leftovers. Wing Attack does slightly less than half of Lugia's health as Lugia retaliates with an Aeroblast, which doesn't do that much damage. The Crobat then confuses Lugia as it goes for a Fly attack. Lugia then hurts itself in confusion as the Crobat hits another powerful Wing Attack. Lugia, however, manages to fight through confusion and use Recover to put it above half health as the Crobat hits another Wing Attack. Lugia uses another Recover to get close to full health and then goes for a Fly after taking a hit from Wing Attack. The Fly lands, which puts the Crobat in red health, but it then confuses Lugia again. Lugia hurts itself in confusion, and I decide to try to go for recover. Unfortunately, Lugia hurts itself in confusion, and I switch out to Typhlosion, who is hit by Wing Attack. Typhlosion hits a weak Quick Attack critical hit before being defeated by the Crobat. I then send out Mewtwo, who is hit by Wing Attack, which is slightly less than half, and I knock out the Crobat with Confusion. Maybe I should have sent in Mewtwo earlier. Just a little maybe. Red then sends out a Rattata, and I'm down to my last 3 Pokemon all on no health. I go into Gengar hoping the Rattata can't hit me, and Hypnosis. I then have Gengar hit a Dream Eater, which leaves the Rattata on half health, but it wakes up and uses Focus Energy. I then have Gengar use Waterfall, which is able to do enough damage to knock out the Rattata, and Red then sends in his final Pokemon, a Gyarados. Unfortunately for me, this is where the no items in battle while being on the level and somehow making something happen story ends. Gyarados is easily able to eat through my team with Hydro Pump and Hyper Beam, but it gave me an idea. A very funny idea. In fact, let's cut some live audio so you can see how this plays out and get my live reaction to it.
To coin flip time! Coin flip time! Coin flip time! Coin flip time! Wow! Yo! Wow! 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 Coin flip time! Let's get it! That actually hit! 2 in a row? 2 in a row! Woo! 1, 2 coin... Bro, 2 coin flips. 2 coin flips. 2 coin flips. 2 coin flips. And it lived. Come on. You had to ruin it. You had to ruin it. Lame-o. You could have taken the L. You could have taken the L on that one. That was so beautiful. You should have just taken the L. You lame-o. You lame-o. You absolute lame-o.
Unfortunately, as you saw, while I got the luck needed and hit the crazy play, it didn't work out fully in the end, and Vaporeon had to finish up with Quick Attack, winning me the run. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this run through Pokemon Crystal using only Pokemon chat gives me through Crowd Control. If you'd like to see more Crowd Control content, be sure to catch me live at 6 PM Eastern Time on twitch.tv whenever I do stream. If you want an update to see when I actually will go live, do check my Discord. I will have a link to that in the description in my socials tab. Be sure to check it out. Once more, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope to see you all in my next video and my next stream. Bye bye now.